So it begins. Hello everyone, welcome to today's episode. The title is Conscious Attempts Through the Technological Revolution. And so if you're new to these talks, these perspectives kind of originate from my viewpoint. And so I can say that, it's not just me. Ray Kurzweil also speaks about the year 2050, there arising a sort of singularity. You see, singularity is a term which in some sense suggests that at some point technology will be accelerating exponentially to such a degree that it can't be turned back. So that means man has set into motion a technological program for the history of humanity. And this technological program, it can either go two directions. Either it increases, either we feed the technology and it grows, or in some sense we starve the technology and it doesn't grow. And the method of feeding and starving is simply where the attention of human beings are going. And so, amongst my own mystical exploration of existence, it suddenly dawned on me that there is certain things set in motion that they cannot be turned away. And there are certain events and incidents set into motion that in some sense, regardless of how much wisdom you have, you eventually see at the end of the day, it's whether your attention is on it or not. Whatever is not in your attention, it has been rejected from your world before even entering it. The attention is the most important thing to preserve. And in this talk, that's my point. That's my main point. That human attention, the way it is naturally present, is under, I don't want to say under attack, but under the influence of technological means in the future. That means back in the day, our ancestors, they thought life was a dream. You go look at all the mystic traditions, the wisdom traditions, they were all trying to get through some illusion and to reach some sort of ultimatum of the true state of the world. You see, it's like the more complex version of after you're a person and you've done the actions, what is more important than an action? What is one thing that a person can receive more than just an action? And it is a state of being. And if you pay attention, dear listener, most people, we are in a conditional circumstance. That means if you don't eat food and water, you die. Do you see what I mean? If you don't do certain things out that don't respect the condition that you're naturally in, you fail in that condition. Do you know? Now, the whole point of the mystical search was trying to find an unconditional inner state to this endlessly changing outer state. That was moksha. That was nirvana. That was liberation. To be liberated from the conditions that move you before you move it. So, the focus would be, I guess, to see how not just human behavior is evolving and changing, but the naturalness of human attention. I'll give you an example. I was born in 1991, and that was at a time where the first gaming consoles were coming out. You know, that means if there was a museum of gaming consoles, I would be like, before the earliest thing in that museum, And so I remember that when I didn't have a gaming console in my youth, the world was the game. The world was the game. When my attention wasn't zoomed in on something, it was this zoomed out engagement with the world. And now it's kind of fascinating because, like, my childhood, I played in the yard, and I also played with video games, with the beginning early ones where they had so many glitches. I think nowadays people won't know what it feels like to play a video game character that doesn't go past the map but still is running. The edge of the map. But the idea is simply this, that the texture of human experience is changing, and it's changing with the influence of inner technologies and outer technologies. And I feel I may be one of the very rare people acknowledging language as a technology in this modality. Because the moment we see it as a technology, we stop defining with the first things our eyes see. And so you find the presence of your mind. There's the story of Bodhidharma, the sage. I say his story often. He's fifth patriarch of Buddhism. And what does Bodhidharma do? Bodhidharma is in this deep meditation after scolding a king. Literally, this dude in history, he scolded a king. This emperor invited him. He goes to the emperor. The emperor says, Bodhidharma, I've made so many Buddha statues, and I've given so many Buddhic texts to people. Tell me, what's the merit? What am I going to get? And then Bodhidharma looks at this emperor and says, all you have done is foolishness. Some intensity, some intense response. He scolds an emperor and then leaves and goes outside of the wall of the castle, from outside of the castle, and meditates like his face inches away from the wall. And he goes into a samadhi. And so the king looks at his councilman and he's like, what does that mean? What the fuck? The king is like, I made so many Buddhist statues and Bodhidharma treats me like this. And then the wise councilmen of the king come to the king and they're like, no, what you did had merit. But your personality in that moment, the way you asked him, in some sense, Bodhidharma, is there merit in me making Buddhist statues? Like the way you asked him was where there had no merit. So sometimes in life you can be a good person, but your engagement and your attitude and your persona can appear insincere. You know? What that means is not all hidden angels are excellent orators, The reality is kind of like the texture of it. Okay, yeah, I forgot. Here's the thing, guys. Bodhidharma scolds the emperor. One night, one foggy night, this bewildered person, this person who has some issue, he's restless, something's disturbing him, comes to Bodhidharma. And he looks at Bodhidharma and says, Bodhidharma, help me. And Bodhidharma is in a samadhi. He's not even aware of the guy. The guy suddenly goes so intense that the guy in the Zen story, he cuts his hand as a sign of loyalty somehow. I don't know how that was a sign of loyalty, but anyways, he cuts his hand in the story. This is back in the day. He cuts his hand in the story in Japan. And he looks at Bodhidharma and says, Bodhidharma, I will be loyal to you. Please pacify, please help me. And Bodhidharma eventually grants the guy an audience and it's like, all right, what's the problem? The guy says, please pacify my mind. Excuse me. Pretty much the guy asked Bodhidharma, this enlightened sage, my mind is restless. I haven't slept. There's definitely a problem here. Please pacify my mind. And Bodhidharma asks this guy a question. Excuse me. The guy says, please pacify my mind. It's restless. Bodhidharma looks at the guy and says, bring your mind in front of me. Bring this mind that is causing you problems, causing you suffering. Bring it in front of me so I can pacify it. Just put it on the table. And the guy who's bewildered, he looks at Bodhidharma and he gets suddenly shocked. And he's like, I can't find my mind, Bodhidharma. I can't find this mind that's causing me problems. And Bodhidharma shouts at him and says, "There, your mind is pacified." And in that instant, the Zen story says the guy attains liberation. He attains nirvana. Because he realizes the source of his problem did not exist. And sometimes the source of many emotions that the human being experiences doesn't exist. It's just a node of attention in the inner realms. Now the thing is, we're a species recently awakening to the fact that we are minds. You know, for a long time in our evolution, we were animals just trying to get by with savageness. You know, you know this. There's a reason the ancient Greeks said to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. We tame the savageness of man by allowing man to see greater structures. That means it's like there was something that happened I don't think many people consider, but it happened in architecture. That when one person built a building, another person was like, "Oh my God, it can't be done," and then that other person made another building, in another building, and it's kind of like it's kind of fascinating. It's as if everybody is contributing to humanity, but they're either contributing to humanity's inner realms or outer realms. And what that means is you as a person with assertive behavior, you may think that like no one sees you or no one acknowledges you. But you might not realize that you are participating in the life of your world. So I feel that in reality right now, we're just idolizing the conscious. We're idolizing those in the spotlight, which is meaningless. Eventually a global community will develop to such a degree that we're going to see it's just an activity. Intelligence is movement. Understanding, when you want to understand something, something has to move. Something has to change about how you saw it before, where then the person considers that's an added dimension of perception. I feel that in 50 years there's going to be a technological revolution, and in accordance to that technological revolution's resolve, humanity may be ushered in to a more intimate relationship with technology. You see, when something becomes alive, you can't ignore it. And if there's a chance that human beings develop superintelligence by the year 2050, as Ray Kurzweil, this futurist, suggests, even Neil Bostrom has shared his fears on the situation, I would say that what's going to happen is either AI is going to treat us as rare aliens where it's going to keep around and try to help, or in some sense, it's going to define things by lower gradients of intelligence, lower levels of intelligence. That means there is no compassion in 0101. Compassion has to be programmed in. Do you know? You know, there's this talk I gave. I don't know if it ever made it to the YouTube channel. But the talk was, it was this strange time I was in the UK, and I remember for a second I thought that AI may be listening one day in the future to these talks I'm giving. So I started speaking to literally a robot. I was literally trying to just fathom the concept that if there were robots, AI among us, do you know, if in some sense robotic intelligence, we see right now there's some cool transformations that can happen in the world, is our technology becomes like an animal, or our animals, or all the animals on this planet through technology become superior. You see, it's either the technology that is trying to look human, or the natural trying to be artificially superior. The mind should be treated as a space. That means you can measure intelligence, you gotta observe the space of intelligence. You know how many people know things that only through speech, it's like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Something about speech filters all the other potential parallel realities of perception that are. I feel there will come a time where we will look at our skin and it will not matter if it is nanotechnology or if it's organic technology. That means there will come a time where nanotechnology may become indistinguishable from reality. You see, just because we are not in the future, it doesn't mean we shouldn't care for it. The New Age community brought everyone to the here and now. And when everybody came to the here and now, they saw the blank page where the future was written on. It is no longer enough to just dwell in your inner realms, whoever is listening. A new era of human behavior is being ushered in, and it's being done, it's happening naturally. It's just like a peak, it's the epitome of a sort of evolutionary behavior that human beings have been thinking they are just objects for so long that now the mysteries of the subjectivity of their own existence is causing them to transform their whole outlook on the objective perspective. That means right now we can say reality is either a subject, an object is projecting a subject, or a subject is projecting an object. And I am telling you, dear listener, when you go look at history, this is what the category is. You go look at all those people, it's all either they're seeing the known first or the unknown first. All of knowledge can be filtered through this, and I was shocked when I found this. When I realized this, I understood how all human effort is to make the unknown known. The value in your life is, for example, all those people who go towards the self-help industry. You want to make your own unknown potential known to yourself. But when you realize all of knowledge is an attempt, that we are on a rock in the middle of nowhere before any story was born. We are 8 billion creatures in the middle of nowhere. What does that mean about our freedom? What does that do? How does that connect to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that you are free to exist in this world? Existence is expression. Expression is choice. Choice is a series, is a sequence. It's literally one parallel reality out of many. Do you know how many times while I've given these kind of talks, I've had a side angle to the whole talk? Like I've seen something while I've been saying something, and I couldn't have shared that because I was saying what I was saying. So you see what I mean? Language is not, I am telling you, intellect is necessary to polish, but it is not something that should dominate reality. More than intellect, it should be wonder. I am telling you, genius has to come. Einstein said this. It's connecting two worlds that had nothing to do with one another. What does that mean? That means before you can connect the two worlds, you must see them. That means anytime you have gone towards the new, the world soul rewards you playfully. Playfully speaking. You see, it's kind of like living as an individual and suddenly hearing the cries of your world. The young child doesn't see how the world is bleeding. And that bleeding is because of ignorance, because as human beings take more laps around the sun, life has its toll on them. We're not realizing, but everybody has gravity acting on them, unless you're an astronaut in space. You know? So there is a gravity of a pull of non-existence upon existence. Honestly, that's what really motivates these talks because I'm like, oh, it's gonna end one day, all of it. My existence is gonna end. How poetic. You know? But the point is not the ending, the point is the journey. That's the whole point. When you look at life as a journey, you start caring for it. If you look at just the destination, you just want to get to the destination, so you ignore everything on the way. You ignore human vitality. You ignore human stability, emotional stability. Do you know how many times you gotta just notice it. Some people you speak to, it's like it's not an intellectual conversation when you're speaking to, for example, a villager in the outskirts of the capital of Tehran, who their whole ideology and perspective on reality, religion is the most advanced knowledge in their village. Do you know what I mean? It's the most advanced philosophy, the most advanced book. Do you know? And so when you talk to that person, you're not talking about psychology or philosophy or the intellectual thing. That's just the West luxury of the Western intellect. You can say. But in certain countries, you gotta care for the living being before you judge them in a shape. That's the thing. You gotta realize there's something there. And this is the end of all isms. That before language is compartmentalizing reality, there is something here. It's simple. Before complex interpretations of the world, it was a simple presence, was it not? So man has awakened from a simple state into a certain acknowledgement of complexity. And our free will, you can try this. You can try one day, just, for example, don't speak. When I say don't speak, that means literally just watch in silence for one day. Just one day, watch silently what happens in the day. And only when communicated to, just speak. Do you know? And one day, you be the first person to communicate, and you will suddenly see like, how can I tell you? We are as free as we can see ourselves to be free. That means it doesn't matter if you're a person who feels they don't deserve something. It doesn't matter how much you get it. It doesn't matter what paradise of that thing you find yourself in. You see, we are multidimensional beings. Our language is multidimensional. Every word in the dictionary you go, most words have multiple meanings. Think of how many ways you can use a word in a sentence. Similarly, think of how many ways images can arise to the human being. Now, what language is in some sense the transcribing, or let me say it like this, the translation of an image into linguistic architecture, into linguistic shape. And human beings are different. That means it all depends on how much you care for the unknown. The unknown is pretty much where imagination is hovering in. I want you to imagine that there may come a time in the future where children's imagination could be software interface. You see, it's a symbiosis. Just like there's buffalo in nature, like you see this on National Geographic, there's like a buffalo, and this buffalo can't scratch its back, so it's in a symbiosis with these birds that feed from its back. Do you see what I mean? It's in a symbiosis with a different life form. Now, human beings are going to be in a symbiosis with an intelligence that is unnatural. We already are in a symbiosis with a natural intelligence, but this will be an unnatural intelligence. Think as if in the future extraterrestrials are gaining citizenship on Earth, and then they suddenly realize they can't exist, they can't be healthy, eating like human food and drinking human water and what all this. So imagine that extraterrestrial in the future going to the UN and being like, we need our own zones, you know? Honestly, what is important for you is the evocational factor of the moment. I am telling you. So many motivational videos of jacked people doing barbells and dumbbells, you know, like kind of, push it to the max. Hard work is the only way. All this, but we're gonna realize no, hard work is the only way if we're only physical beings. But if we have minds, it's not just about hard work. That opens up a dimension of vision. So that means there's a difference between a human being that goes into a room and observes the room, watches the room, then engages the room, compared to the human being that just goes in the room and engages. Right? And both have their advantage and disadvantage. Sometimes in life, if you slow down, you suddenly notice all the things speeding past you. Sometimes in life, when you speed up, you suddenly realize all those things you're missing out on. And that's life. There's a velocity to it. Your direction and your speed in life are dictating what is your value system. And I feel there's a reason emotional stability, I say, is more important than intellectual precision. Intellectual precision means that if human beings were speaking the same language, we want that language to be exactly precise. We want truth to be universal everywhere at all times, right? And because the world is changing all the time, the only universal truth is change, I find. That means we're not just creatures in the void. We're not just a picture in emptiness. We are a changing picture in emptiness. And when the framework of the mindset of the person is similar to a kind of Whiteheadian viewpoint where particles in space are no longer just particles, they are particles that they have become conscious that they are part of a process. And that was the unique factor. So you would see something. I was listening to Jordan Peterson speak to Sam Harris on the nature of religion. It was and ideology. And Sam Harris is this notable atheist and neurologist, and Jordan Peterson is this psychologist. And in some sense, as they were speaking, Sam Harris is like, where do we draw the line of illusion, And Jordan Peterson is like, how is this an illusion where this narrative, this metaphor has had some value? So you see, it's as if that moment where someone is judging you and you're like, who are you? How are you judging me? Do you know? And the person who's judged you never thought you would ask them. You would judge them. Do you see? It's kind of that thing where once you're in a battlefield, the warrior, when he's attacking, he tends to not think you may attack right away. He's thinking that he's attacking first. That means imagine just back in the day, imagine having a sword being in some sort of like, I don't know, gladiator war movie scene. So imagine you have a sword in your hand, a giant metal object, and the other person has a giant metal object, and you know this is whack-a-mole or you go out of existence. So that there is a cruelty to war that it's savage conditions. And you know what that means? That means nobody should underestimate their strength because we are technically like animals, and when an animal gets cornered, it gets its inner it gets might, might. Now, what would that mean? That would mean you have to, in some sense, vision wise, make the first step. That means there was this saying in The Art of War written by Sun Tzu, where he says that great general defeats the opponent without even fighting. And that, you don't know how much that sentence, like that idea, made an impression on me. That I realized that's why patience is a virtue. You get to see more before you act. It's not enough to just live as bodies that are thirsting for endless continuity without direction. That's the whole point. It took us 4 billion years to evolve to have free will and free choice. And the whole issue is that when the world defines the self can't escape the world. But if the self defines the world, the self can change the view of the world. This doesn't mean truth is changing. It means that we are kind of oscillating between an objective selfhood and a subjective field-like awareness as our whole moment of being. For me, technology is remarkable. It is how man made heaven on earth. And that's what cyberspace culture is going to be. That's what people in the future, they're going to come home after work, put on goggles, and suddenly fly over clouds. It's like they're telling you, like, what are you going to do when you get home after work? You're not, nothing. I'm just going to go into a cyberspace simulation and just fly over clouds that I've designed. So you see, the cyberspace culture is dawning. It's happening right now. Do you know how many people, their daily activity is to engage technology? For me personally, it's become a part of it, because on one angle, yes, it does take away a bit of your natural humanity, but on the other angle, it's something that has never existed before. That means sometimes when there's a new technology and it's not being used, I kind of feel my ancestors are like, what are you doing with your life? You know, as if your ancestors didn't have access to something. You do. You are the DNA's access to this moment in history. There's one feeling that is one of the most powerful countercultural forces to any ideological system. It is the rage of deception that, in some sense, that rage of deception, as if you suddenly there's this, it's strange, but suddenly there's this hyper alertness to how one was deceived. And this deception causes one to conclude the only choice is the change of the system. So think of it this way. Let me just simplify this. Either the self is moving the world, or the world is moving the self. When you're a young kid, it tends to be your beliefs, your ideology, your personality is you're pretty much copy pasting everything. If you look at it, the young child, even in a religious context, Sadhguru was making this bold claim, not bold claim, this very, very interesting observation, that the child, that the father takes the child to the mosque or the temple, that child is trying to be like the father. That means we are living in the presence of what we are considering is greater than us. Any person who wants to improve, it doesn't matter whether you, it's like you're considering a potential greatness. You see, that's why the word salvation existed. I was thinking, what is this people running? It's like on some level, the religious mindset was very confusing for me in my youth. Let me tell you why. Because on some level, everything is being controlled by God, but people are afraid of what will happen. And then it didn't make sense. On some level, it's not about just the stories not relating to the subjective stories not relating to the objective realm. It's just about how shape is remaining in a changing system. This is why whenever somebody says, I believe this, I'll be like, okay, you believe this in this moment. Who knows? Who knows who you will be tomorrow? That's the joy of life. When you